What's up, people? This is GMA Tank, and this is the painting with commentary for the Nolzur Marvelous Miniature Giant Constrictor Snake, episode 47 of Paint to Life. This particular snake is based on a real Peruvian boa constrictor, and I had some source pictures that I started with, and here they are. Pretty looking snake. You can see he's got the black rings, he's got the iridescent shine, and that's what we're going to have to emulate. So, how am I going to get that shine? Green Stuff World sells a holographic paint. Let's try that. So I started with a test, some Griffon orange, and I put that holographic paint on. Now how does it shine? As you can see, quite well. It's got a rainbow effect and still remains translucent. So I planned out the design for the snake and the colors that I was going to use, as you can see here, on a piece of paper. And that just helps me as like a color guide throughout. Gave it a quick test on the actual model to make sure I was happy with how they dried, and off to the races. Here's the complete list of all the paints I used in this video as suggested by a user in the comments. So I'll be putting these in moving forward in these painting with commentary videos. I know I showcase them in each part of the video, but I'll just summarize them in one spot here so that in the future you can just have a quick list to glance at. So thanks for that feedback. So off to the races. Griffon orange was the orange that I was going to use to represent in my trusty airbrush. Funny, I've just got it and I've really only used it twice, once with black and once with this orange, as I used the same orange for the Nightmare Dragon in episode 45 of Paint to Life. But today, it's going to be the base coat for our giant constrictor snake. Now this is a contrast paint and I'm still learning airbrushing. I'm certainly by no means any good at it, but the contrast paint I just applied directly into my airbrush with a 3mm needle, and it just sprayed just fine. I didn't dilute it. It's contrast, so it's some built-in levels of contrast, obviously. And there it was. That was the first line. Now, Black Templar. Now this is my plan. I was going to build up the circles by doing orange, then black, then orange. Makes sense, except my airbrushing skills leave a little to be desired, and my PSI was a little too high on the compressor, which I didn't realize at the time. So as I'm spraying these black pieces, which should be nice and neat, and of course, why don't you just use your brush? Well, because I have a new airbrush and I want to learn how to use it, so I'm going to be airbrushing a lot as opposed to doing paint brushing, which this might have been much easier to do. But I think this is a perfect idea for an application of an airbrush, provided you get control of it and don't blast it all over like I did. You can see the paint is kind of bleeding into the orange, and that's not because the orange is still wet and it's mixing. It's because my air pressure is too high and it's blowing the paint off of the orange before it has a chance to dry. So I learned a little at this, and I'll have to touch up all those rings later. Not like this. I think this is me trying to hit it in orange on top of those blacks and realizing, yeah, that's never going to work. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I was trying to spray the center of each of those rings with this color here, Jokero orange. I was going to use the airbrush to spray inside those black dots to get this, and it was never going to happen. I have no accuracy control. So out comes the old brush, and actually I like this better. The black has a nice tempered edge because it's kind of tempered, whichever, because it kind of blended out with the airbrush, whereas this has got a sharp edge because I'm applying it with the brush. So the black seems kind of natural, like it would on the scales, and then these blotches of orange seem nice and tight as I want them to be. So as I fill all of those in, then it's time to use black. The Peruvian Rainbow Boa has 3 parallel lines going down its head. So again, if I reference back to my drawing at the beginning, I knew I was going to be drawing these lines along his snout, if you will. I started around the eyes and continued them down, and I'll touch them up later. And also, we know that they have these rings, but they also have rings that have black solid circles in them. So I'm going around the snake and I'm applying a dot of black to the bottom of some of those rings, just to give it those eye-like eyelets that the snake is known for. This was how I did the patterning for the whole snake. Now, Casandoro yellow, it's a shade, and it comes to remind me that I didn't put it in that summary at the beginning. I don't know if this step was absolutely necessary. I found that Jokero orange was a little too peachy for my likes, so I used the Casandoro yellow to bring it back down into the other color. So I used some pink horror and Kislev flesh for the inside of his mouth. I'm not worried about the teeth right now. I'm just getting it fleshy looking, and the pink horror on the tongue, and now I use Ushabti bone for teeth. It's not quite a white, it's an off-white for kind of ivory-looking teeth that I wanted to kind of get. And it's also the same color I'm using underneath. Before I'm going to change that color later with some contrast paint, but for now, the base is the Ushabti bone. You know, it's funny, sometimes I think about some of the people who watch this channel who probably play Warhammer and have been using these paints from Citadel for a long time, and they reference different armies and things, and they probably know what Ushabti means, but to me it's just a weird word. Ushabti bone. Anyways, so now we're touching that Ushabti bone with this nice drag yellow. This is the contrast paint I'm putting onto the bone to give it a creamy kind of yellow look, like the source pictures I had at the beginning. And that's that. Now here's the finished snake. Now in order to use any type of holographic paint, it needs to be glossy. So here I was finished with this non-glossy snake, and then I put a coat of Liquitex gloss varnish on it. Now it looks very wet. It's a little more red in that picture than in real life, but that's okay. That's the gloss. Now that it's all glossy, it's time to get our liquid mask from Green Stuff World. Now I use this, again, this is a new product I'm using. I'm going to paint this on the entire snake's dorsal fin. Back, its dorset. I know the holographic paint can be somewhat transparent, but I don't want it to creep up onto its back. I want it to stay on the flanks only. So I'm using this product to create a mask, a liquid mask, that will protect the back from getting the overspray of the holographic paint. I don't want any paint to be on the back, just the sides, and I don't want it on the belly either. So I'm going to put this paint all over the top of the back of the snake and the belly of the snake. Then I'm going to hit the holographic paint on the side. Now, a viewer mentioned, you can use silly putty as masking tape, and I think that's a great idea. This liquid mask product, while it's not expensive, is kind of like a liquid latex. It's it says not to pour it in the drain, so I'm sure it's not the best thing in the world to be using. So if all you're going to be doing is covering a pipe that's holding something up, like a flying stand, like I did with the Grim Reaper, silly putty is a great idea as opposed to using this. So here we go. I've finished putting this on my snake in all the relevant areas, and it's starting to dry. As you can see, it dries at kind of a translucent-y green, and it's creamy, but after a couple hours it dries clear, and there it is, fully dried. Kind of cool, green orange snake, and that's a cool color combination. But now that it's on there, it's time to get out the holographic in the airbrush. It's an alcohol base, and just gently apply it. Now it needs to be solid enough to cause a reflection, but if you make it too heavy, then it just turns silver. So I certainly didn't want a snake with silver sides, which sort of get here actually. I put a little too much on, a little too heavy-handed, and when I peel the latex off in the next step, there's a definitive line where it was, and that was my mistake, and I have to fix that. I like the analogy of this. It's like a snake shedding its skin, see that? But here comes off the latex, and there's the silvering that I did. It's a little too intense. So I have to do a little fix here. I'm using Squig Orange, which is very similar to the Griffon Orange contrast paint. I'm applying it very wet, watered down to the silver at the tops and bottoms of where the silver starts, and blending it in with my finger while it's wet. I want to push it in there just to help bite off some of that holographic intensity, because like I said, it was too strong. So I'm using a watered down Squig Orange to cut it, and it's not really in the frame here unfortunately, but you get the idea. Once I do this and it dries, I'm going to gently use the holographic paint once more, but this time a little more controlled in the center, and then the end result I'm quite happy with how it all came together once it dries. So now we're putting some Sterling Battlemire. I've glued the snake on the base. This snake will not come off of its bubblegum base because it's a solid piece. That's cool. So we're going to glue it onto the black base, and we're going to build up around the bubblegum base. Now these snakes live in the rainforest. They live on jungle floors. Do some research. Look what that looks like. Dead leaves, dead brush, rotting decomposition of matter. So anywhere where his bubblegum piece was sticking out, Rhinox hide, which is a pretty close to that Sterling mud, and also didn't have it in the beginning picture. I'll work on that. but you guys can see it from here. So the Rhinox hide just kind of blends it all together. Now I'm going to get some glue. Now that sterling mud is actually still wet while I'm doing this. I'm blending the glue in with the texture paint to make this slurry nonsense. I also have a static grass applicator now. I got a cheap one on Amazon, just like a handheld, a tinier one than the big ones, so it was less expensive. So I'm going to try this for the first time. Heads up, it doesn't work. Probably because I have that sterling mud in there, it didn't work for me. That's okay though. Ultimately, I'm putting this Battle Mire grass that just came up on the screen down, and it will eventually dry and be good. Now, to make more grime, I've got some bark from trees, yes, and I'm going to shed it up into little splinters like this. This is going to be the refuse that belongs at the bottom of the forest. This, dry wood is kind of rotten. I can break it apart with my fingers. I'm making a pile of dirt and little teeny wood chips. Adding some glue to my grass, which is a nice green undercoat, and now I'm just dunking this on there. A little bit of hard pieces of bark. I've got a couple dead leaves, but not too many. I didn't want it to look like there were leaves everywhere. Mostly this bark is what I wanted, because these are jungle plants, so the bark is in long strips to look like bamboo and big leaf debris instead of that's the piece of bark I'm going to use on the side. So I put a little bit of glue down. I use a hot glue gun to fix it, and then some of this mesh vines, and there it is. So let's take a look at the finished product. So as we can see in the finished model, the transparent iridescent streak on the side, you can still see the orange through it. Now I took these pictures under 2 flashlights against my black velvet backdrop to try and pull out the iridescence in the color, which was successful. It casts some harsh shadows, but at the same time it's a nocturnal animal, so I thought this would be kind of neat, almost like what you'd find if you found the snake in the wild. So there's the kind of the grass on the base with all that shredded bark, as well as the little piece of bark that he's kind of hiding behind. I think it's a pretty cool effect. You can again see some of that rainbow sheen in this shot here. I'm going to do a real extreme close-up so you can see what you might not be able to see from a distance. You're always going to be a brave soul getting this close to your minis, but as you can see, there's that iridescent shine, that rainbow effect we're looking for in the flanks. And there's that bark. Worked out really well. When the spring comes, get out there, get some nature stuff, keep it in bags so you can use it as basing all year round. Here's his backside. I like this picture because it gives you a good shine of all of his patterns, which otherwise kind of get lost from the side. But yeah, so that's my Rainbow Boa from Paint to Life episode 47. If you have any questions about this, feel free to leave me a comments in the below, and I will certainly get back to you. You can email me as well at painttolife@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm GMA Tank, and wash your hands, people.